Cody Bennett from Lindale, Texas now. Was originally born in Long Beach, California. Grew up in Oklahoma most of my life. Been a member of CCF about a year and a half now. I was asked to kind of tell my story and how I reached joy and through what transpired in my childhood and in my service in the military. So I guess we'll go back to the beginning. That's where it all starts. Like I said, I was born in Long Beach, California. My mother and father divorced there. My mom moved to Florida. The only memories I have in Florida are a red barn and things that happened there were unpleasant. At one point, my mom loaded me and my brother up and left Florida. Found out years later the reason that we left was because the man that she was living with was going to harm me. And to keep me safe, she left Florida, went to Wisconsin, found my dad, biological father. They remarried and were married for several years. When we left Wisconsin, we moved to Oklahoma. My mom and dad divorced again. My mom had a love for scotch and men that were less than pleasant to be around. At 14, I ended up going to live with my father. He had a very stiff hand in punishment. He had a son who was out of control, just going nuts, and the only way he thought that he could control me was to use a very righteous hand. Graduated high school at the age of 18, left the United States military, became a military medic. First duty station was Berlin, Germany. Oh man, what a place to be. Was there when the wall came down, was there for the removal of Checkpoint Charlie. Just an awesome place to be stationed, especially for a young man to be sent overseas and to be a part of history. Desert Storm, Desert Shield developed. They needed medics. I volunteered to go. Was sent to 267 Armor out of Freiburg, Germany, deployed with an armor battalion. Got over there, spent months in the desert learning how to be a better medic. And then we finally crossed the berm. And when we did, that's when things got rough. The American casualties were not significant. Matter of fact, we lost no lives in my company due to enemy action. But the enemies that we took care of, that we had hurt and maimed, were just numerous. The easiest thing to do for a lot of them was to put them to sleep. And at the time, I didn't think about it as being wrong. At the time, I didn't think about it as being anything other than humane. Came back from Desert Storm, Desert Shield, re-enlisted, was sent to Fort Hood, married, have a son, divorced when I moved to the Tyler area, remarried, divorced again. And from 95 to 05 was a time in my life that was pretty dark. I stayed drunk a lot, alcohol, drugs, trying to quench or put out a pain that just wouldn't go away. 05, I gave my life back to Christ after a DWI. I was at Cross Brown Cowboy Church when that happened, and started being discipled by other men that were stronger Christians than I, and I was able to stay away from the alcohol and the drugs. Stumbled across a wonderful lady by the name of Michelle, and she goes to this church with me, and she's my wife of 10 years now. And our marriage grows stronger every day because of what Christ has done in our lives. After leaving Cross Brand, ended up at Carmel Baptist Church, was asked to be a minister there, or youth minister there, and was licensed to the ministry in the church. Baptized 9 kids in that church. It's a pretty awesome feeling. 3 years ago, April, it all came crashing down. I tried to take my life. Didn't know why I tried to take my life. Had 2 failed marriages, was trying to run a business, was not being successful. And it all just came crashing down on me, and I thought the only way out of it was to end it. A dear friend of mine named Richard Gibson ended up at my house because of a phone call from my wife. He talked with me, prayed with me, asked me not to take my life, asked me if I promised him the next morning I'd get up, I'd go seek help. And I did. I ended up getting up, went to the VA, signed myself into Behavioral Health Center. And after that, the reason for the alcohol, the reason for the anger and the outburst in my life all came forward. I had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Didn't know that I had it, but it explains a lot. Ended up in Bonham, Texas, a year later for treatment, inpatient treatment. Had to be weaned off all the narcotics that the VA put me on so I wouldn't, quote, quote, hurt myself again. Took 4 weeks to wean off all the drugs they put me on. During my time in Bonham, I was able to get my head right, but I didn't get my heart right. My heart was still embittered with people from my past, whether it be family members, moms, dads, church members who, when I attempted to take my life, stopped bringing their kids to my youth group because I guess they thought I'd hurt them. I don't know. And my wife started coming to CCF during the time when I was in Bonham. And I remember her coming to church with her here. And when we would leave church, she would say, "Honey, I've been to church today." And I would say, "Yeah, we've been to church, dear. I understand that. We went to church. It's Sunday. Now I got to go back to Bonham." And this went on for a while until one Sunday it sunk in. And the message that David spoke sunk in. And I had been to church that day. My spirit had been fed. We started coming here when I was released from Bonham after completing the PTSD program there. My head was right, but my heart was wrong. I was still a bitter, bitter man at people, at God. I was just angry. How dare you let these things happen to me? Why me? Why couldn't you pick on somebody else? I'm your child. Why couldn't you pick on somebody else? Why couldn't somebody else suffer what I suffered? Why couldn't somebody else go through what I went through? Why did it have to be me? Marty Thomas, a fellow veteran and soldier, asked me to drive a bus to Kairos at Gateway Church. I explained to him that I had reservations about going there. I told him if people start falling out in the aisles or they start dancing with snakes, I'm gone. You're not going to stop me. And I grew up missionary Baptist, so to go to a church that is more liberal than I've ever been in, I was scared. I'm not going to lie. I was just flat scared. But I drove a bus up there anyways, and I'm so glad I did, because this is where the joy starts. Through Kairos at Gateway, I remember sitting in there and the praise and worship was phenomenal. And then we had these workbooks, and I opened this workbook up and I'm like, wow, I just did this in Bonham. This is cognitive processing therapy for Christ. But the first thing is we had to pray, and we had to find out what name Christ had for us, what God had for us, or Jesus had for us. And the two names that came to mind, number one was Son, and number two was Warrior. And the scripture that came to mind when he said Son was, even though my earthly father will forsake me, God never will. When the word warrior came, I was like, no, dude, I'm sorry. I've already done that. I'm not going back to that. And he said, that's not what I mean. He said, that's to be revealed. So we're going through Kairos. It's pretty emotional. A lot of things are coming up from my past that I'm having to deal with. And on the second day, we had to ask the question, where were you when all these things were happening to me? Where were you when I was laying in the pasture and I was being kicked? Where were you, God, when the car flipped 3 times and I didn't have my seatbelt on and I walked away from it? Where were you when I was administering morphine to Iraqis so they could go to sleep? Where were you when the people at my church abandoned me because they didn't understand what was wrong with me? Where were you? And I was literally screaming, "Where were you?" And then it came to me. A vision just as clear as I'm looking at Roland right now, and just as clear as me and Roland are from one another, the vision came to me that when I was laying in the pasture, Jesus Christ had his arms around me and was keeping me from being hurt. When my mom's boyfriends would beat on me, he was there to help break the blows. When I got alcohol poisoning as a teenager, he was the one that woke somebody up next to me to keep me from drowning in my own vomit. He was there in Iraq when I was doing what I was doing. He was there when people left and stopped being what we call friends. He was there during all of that. And then I realized he was there for a reason. And that reason is so, number one, I guess I can sit here today and share my story. That reason is because somebody had to go through what I went through to be able to work with and witness to other people who have suffered the same things that I have suffered. Whether it be a failed marriage, whether it be PTSD, whether it be child abuse, whether it be drinking or using drugs. All of these things in my life that I took for a negative, God turned into a positive. He gave me a wonderful wife who has stuck by me through all of my troubles. And every day our relationship grows stronger and stronger. He's given me a church family that stands beside me no matter what. No matter how sick I am, no matter how messed up I am, they still wrap their arms around me and they still love me. How can that not be joy? How can that not be joy unspeakable through Christ our Father? You've got the condensed version of my life. It was pretty tormented. But as I grew as a Christian and as I was mentored by people that were stronger Christians than me, a couple of things settled in my brain, especially over the past couple of years. Number one, the scripture says, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. A good shepherd will go before his sheep into the next grazing area and prepare that area for his sheep. If there's animals that are hurt his sheep, he's there to remove them. If there's weeds and stuff that will hurt his sheep, he's there to remove them. If the waters are too swift, he'll dam the waters up to slow them down to give calm waters to his sheep. And I can have joy because I know that my shepherd, who calls me a sheep, goes before me and gives me calm waters and green pastures to lay in. And I'm going to leave with this. And I guess that this came to me just recently. The song of the little drummer boy keeps coming back in my head. And I know it's not Christmas, but it keeps coming back in my head. He didn't have gifts of frankincense or myrrh. He didn't have gifts of gold. He had the gift of a drum, the sound of a drum. I don't have gifts of frankincense or gold. I don't have gifts of myrrh. I don't have large sums of money. But I have my life. And that's what Christ asked for. And that is the greatest gift that I have to give to him is my service. And by serving him, whether it's working with veterans or PTSD, or whether it was working with kids who had been abused when I worked at Hazelway, or all the different facets that he's been able to use me over the years, that's where my joy comes from. That's where my joy unspeakable comes from, is being able to be that gift to Jesus that he asked me to be.